Hello everyone. Thank you for tuning into my condition presentation. My name is Christopher King, and for my condition, I chose dementia, also currently known as major neurocognitive disorder. So for my presentation, I happen to be one of the odd men out, and so unfortunately I don't have a partner. Therefore, my presentation will only consist of one part. You won't see the second part with the article or list of national resources. After my chosen video, my presentation will be over. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in again, and I hope you enjoy. So I'm actually just diving right into the diagnostic criteria. There are 4 total diagnostic criterion for major neurocognitive disorder, with some additional notes that I will be reviewing, which I feel are pertinent to this presentation. So first, criterion A, evidence of significant cognitive decline from a previous level of performance in one or more cognitive domains, which I will be reviewing in detail just a little bit. And part 1 of this criterion is 1, concern of the individual, that is the person you will be assessing, a knowledgeable informant, that is a member of their family or a friend, someone who's close to that individual, or the clinician. It could be a referring clinician or whomever refers the patient themselves, that there has been a significant decline in cognitive function, and part 2, a substantial impairment in cognitive performance, preferably documented by standardized neuropsychological testing, or in its absence, another quantified clinical assessment. So in review, criterion A basically establishes the importance of not solely relying on a snapshot of a particular patient's cognitive abilities at a single point in time. Rather, we're trying to compare it to some other point, be it a point of reference given by the patient themselves, a knowledgeable informant such as a patient's friend or family, or the referring clinician. We want to compare it to some other point in time in order to verify and ensure that there is some sort of cognitive decline happening. And in addition to that, you want to be as specific as possible as far as the time frame is concerned associated with the cognitive decline, just because it makes it a little bit easier in trying to rule out or establish differential diagnosis later on. And I see criterion A part 2 sort of from a clinician standpoint. If we are the ones to be assessing this decline, then we do have the ability to subject the patient to some sort of standardized neuropsychological testing, or in its absence, a quantified clinical assessment, just so that we have for our measurements, for our notes, some sort of substantiation of, again, a cognitive decline over time in that particular patient. And now criterion B through D. So criterion B reads, the cognitive deficits interfere with independence in everyday activities. Some examples are given: at a minimum, requiring assistance with complex instrumental activities of daily living, such as paying bills or managing medications. Criterion C reads, the cognitive deficits do not occur exclusively in the context of a delirium. See delirium in the DSM-5. Criterion D reads, the cognitive deficits are not better explained by another mental disorder, for example, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, etc. Okay, and at the bottom of the slide, I've added a couple of additional notes, of course, from the major neurocognitive disorder section, but just that I thought were pertinent to the presentation. Due to various etiological subtypes, and when I say etiological subtypes, what I mean is how the disorder comes about. So it's basically the origin of the disorder. So there are different origins. Neurocognitive or major neurocognitive disorder can be brought about by Alzheimer's disease. It can be brought about by medication. Some medication can mimic the symptoms of major neurocognitive disorder or other neurocognitive disorders, and so that's what I mean. So due to various etiological subtypes, care must be taken to specify which subtype is exhibited. Diagnostic features are specific to each subtype If you are looking for information to support a diagnosis, it is best to search under the etiological subtype you believe is being exhibited. For assistance in differential diagnosis, which I will also be going over later, even among the neurocognitive disorders, look at the development and course of the symptoms. This may help rule out certain subtypes or another disorder altogether, given that the course of these disorders vary based on etiological subtype. And on this slide, I've included some additional notes just associated with both the criteria and other important notes that I pulled from the DSM associated with major neurocognitive disorder. So first, major neurocognitive disorder was previously documented as dementia in the DSM-4, and I've investigated to find that out after I had a lot of trouble looking up dementia in the DSM-5. Actually, in the introduction section of neurocognitive disorders, the DSM-5 points out the name change and why, basically. Age is the strongest risk factor for mild or major neurocognitive disorder due to the increase in risk of neurodegenerative and cerebrovascular diseases. It is very important to establish or confirm a baseline of cognitive performance to confirm cognitive decline, and this is sort of what I was getting at earlier, as the baseline performance for any one neurocognitive domain may differ based on the individual. In many cases, multiple evaluations over time may be needed. An array of neuropsychological exams specific to each neurocognitive domain are available for assessment purposes along with the use of neuroimaging technology such as MRIs. So where the quantitative assessments fail us, we also have or we can also benefit from the use of neuroimaging technology like MRIs, because sometimes you'll see there is a correlation between an actual decrease in the size of a particular portion of the brain, and that is correlated along with a decline in function for a particular cognitive domain. The most obvious correlation that comes to mind for myself is the hippocampus in the brain and its correlation to long-term memory storage and function, just to name an example. Okay, and on this slide you can see the chart that I made. It's almost a copy of the chart that can be found in the DSM-5, but I've left a lot of things out for the sake of time. And again, for the sake of time, I've listed all 6 neurocognitive domains, which include complex attention, executive function, learning and memory, language, perceptual, motor, and social cognition. So I'm going to go down those 6 domains and just give some descriptors and then some symptom/observation examples that you'll see with major neurocognitive disorder specifically. But I also would like to add that if you have time, please feel free to pause the video and read over all of the examples. You can take as much time as you'd like. That way, this video is not 30 hours long and you can read all you'd like on your own time. Okay, and first we have the domain of complex attention. So some of the domain descriptors for complex attention include sustained memory, divided attention, selective attention, and processing speed. And some of the symptoms and observations that you'll see in someone who may be suffering from major neurocognitive disorder include increased difficulty in environments with multiple stimuli, easily distracted by multiple competing events in the surrounding environment. So basically they can't pay attention to one thing at once, or one thing when there are multiple things going on, or one thing for an extended period of time. Next is executive function, and some of the descriptors include planning, decision-making, working memory, responding to feedback/error correction, overriding habit/inhibition, and mental flexibility. And the example that I'm going to give for that is abandons complex projects due to the need to focus on one task at a time. That's just one example. Next is learning and memory, and some descriptors of learning and memory include immediate memory, recent memory, including free recall, cued recall, and recognition memory, very long-term memory, including semantic, autobiographical, and implicit learning. One example of that is repeat self in conversation, often within the same conversation. Okay, and next is the domain of language. Some descriptors of the domain of language include expressive and receptive language. Examples for expressive language include naming, word finding, fluency, grammar, and syntax. Some observation examples for major neurocognitive disorder under the language domain are has significant difficulties with expressive or receptive language. That one's a little vague, so I'm going to give a second example. With severe impairment, may have difficulty recalling the names of close family and friends, and that's actually something that you'll see in the video. That will be a little bit later. Next is perceptual motor, includes ability subsumed under the terms visual perception, visual constructional, perceptual motor, praxis, which is the ability to perform voluntary skilled movements, and gnosis, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is the ability to recognize objects. An example of that, significant difficulties with previously familiar activities. I'll go ahead and give a second example for that as well. Significant difficulty navigating in an unfamiliar environment. And last but not least, we have the domain of social cognition, recognition of emotions, and theory of mind are some descriptors of that particular domain. And an example of something that you'll see in someone with major neurocognitive disorder includes exhibits behavior clearly out of acceptable social range and shows insensitivity to social standards and modesty of dress or of political, religious, or sexual topics of discussion. And at this point, I just wanted to stop and recognize that these are the actual cognitive domains or neurocognitive domains that are referenced in criterion A of major neurocognitive disorder. So it's again found in a chart in the book. These are all of the neurocognitive domains, and in major neurocognitive disorder, we expect to see a certain amount of decline in one or more of these domains. Okay, and for this part of the presentation, I am going to share with you guys a chart that I've actually made for myself, and the chart is associated with the differential diagnosis. Obviously, that's when one or more disorders has overlapping symptoms, and so you need a way to distinguish between the two. So the potential differential diagnoses for major neurocognitive disorder include four things. So that's normal cognition, delirium, major depressive disorder, and specific learning and other neurodevelopmental disorders. So with normal cognition, it's not really a disorder. And they put that in the differential diagnosis section to say that a decline in mental function is something to be expected. And so with a patient where we expect major neurocognitive disorder, it's very important to again establish or verify a baseline of cognitive function for that particular domain in question, and then test against that established baseline at another time or over time. Or that's just one way. You can also rely on people in that particular person's support group or support network, such as a family member, a friend, or even a previous doctor. And clearly, in my opinion, normal cognition and specific learning or other neurodevelopmental disorders are similar in terms of the what you would do to distinguish between those disorders or those particular states and major neurocognitive disorder. So that's basically establishing a baseline of cognitive function and then testing against that baseline to see if there is a particular decline. With specific learning or other neurodevelopmental disorders, they may not have the same associated steep decline in function along a particular neurocognitive domain as major neurocognitive disorder, and so that is a way to distinguish between the two. And here's where I would like to also add a note to keep in mind that some of these disorders can co-occur. So delirium, major depressive disorders, and even specific learning or other neurodevelopmental disorders can co-occur with major neurocognitive disorder. So that just makes everything that much more complicated. But as long as we have criterion met for each disorder, that is a good way to establish or verify the presence of those particular disorders. Just keep in mind that they can co-occur. So it's not one or the other. Okay, and we have made it to everyone's favorite part, including mine, and that's the video. So for my video, I chose a video which exhibits a clinician actually screening a patient for major neurocognitive disorder slash dementia. And with her, he's actually testing against a couple of neurocognitive domains. So it's a fun little exercise. See if you can pick out which one based on my chart or the DSM-5's chart. And as a final note, if you are watching this on YouTube as a video presentation, I've included the link to the video in the description box below. So with that, I hope you guys, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you guys found it informative. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and have a great day.